Before the internet was widely adopted, a lot of games lived in secrecy, particularly JRPGs. For me, Seiken Densetsu 3 was the granddaddy of them all. The phrase Secret of Mana sequel was enough to activate thousands of JRPG fans' sleeper agents everywhere, which led to the proliferation of fan translations and thus the legacy of the game itself. But I couldn't play everything back then, and Live Alive was another big JRPG that eluded me, until now. We're living in a golden age of gaming nostalgia as far as many of the classic publishers are concerned. For other industries, it's commonplace to see old media reborn and resold again, but given that gaming really took off in the 90s, we're truly starting to see unprecedented growth in nostalgia mining. For Square Enix, that demand went into high gear with Octopath Traveler, opening up a go-to retro-modern aesthetic blueprint. The 2022 Live Alive remake is one of the results of that retro RPG revival floodgates opening. Originally released in 1994 on the SNES, Live Alive was a highly experimental RPG that juggled multiple eras and storylines in very ambitious fashion. Not all of it worked in the 90s, and not all of it works now, but it's still just as mesmerizing and just as inviting for people who want to try something wild and weird. For reference, here are the core Live Alive time periods you'll be playing: Prehistory, Imperial China, Edo Japan, Wild West, Present Day, Near Future, and Distant Future. All of these feature their own protagonists, narratives, and mechanics, and link up over time. While the vast majority of the game is held together by a grid-based JRPG battle system, Live Alive is largely story-driven, and each age generally has its own gimmick. It's probably best to describe each time period as its own little micro-game. Some of them, like Imperial China, are more straightforward than others. With the China-based story, you basically acquire your party like you would with many other JRPGs, and explore a small collective of maps that would amount to a town and a few surrounding areas in a bigger game. You're free to trek about with the addition of a radar, which shows you vaguely where to go next and points of interest, or you can toggle that off and wander aimlessly. A few stories are deeply traditional, but many of them branch off and offer a distinctly unique experience. In Edo Japan, you play the role of a lone shinobi infiltrating a compound in a bid to save Japan from an unknown cataclysmic force. You'll sneak around attempting to avoid combat, as many enemies are straight up way stronger than you, with a cute little stealth ability, and map out the places you go. The present-day storyline in Live Alive has you training to become the best, with a classic training montage straight out of an 80s action film, then selecting characters from a fighting game menu to battle, one by one, with no outward open map to speak of. The Near Future era has a boy who can read minds, and is largely a story-driven experience, asking players to optionally trigger the ability to see what each NPC is thinking. You get the idea. As you can imagine, not all of the periods hit as hard individually. Several can feel repetitive, especially ones that are combat-heavy without much in the way of progression. And not every story is going to land for everyone. The micro-story strategy also has the unintended outcome of seeing strong narratives cut short, as there wasn't enough time to sink your teeth into them. Conversely, if you overstay their welcome, it's the cost of the format. Within each era, there's also some light leveling mechanics. A few will start you at what could essentially be considered max level to speed you along and prop up the theme of being strong already. Most are glued together by combat. Combat in Live Alive is governed by a grid system, where nearly every action, including movement, costs time. Moving is considered an action of sorts, and a full bar will allow you to act, usually with an ability, that can typically buff, debuff, heal, or deal damage. Each game has its own set of abilities you need to pick up on, some of which start out at the ground level and gradually grow in size, while others will just dump 6 or more powers on you at once. The core strategy lies in positioning and range, and even counters have a specific range requirement. At first, I expect some folks to rush in movement-wise and get completely wrecked, but very quickly you'll start to learn the power of positioning, which is everything in Live Alive. When done correctly, you can use movement to your advantage and almost lock out some enemies. It's fun to figure out, and once you've solved it, the game is mostly over. Again, it's a common theme with Live Alive. Aesthetically, the HD 2D concept, as Square calls it, is beautifully implemented. The Wild West might be my personal favorite, but Edo Japan looks absolutely beautiful as a standout way to show off the game. The use of color really helps these worlds pop, but the team had a wonderful source to work with, as the characters and environmental concepts in the original game were already fantastic. As for what to expect, they're a few hours long each, and cementing the microgame thesis, have their own opening and ending credits. If you do the math, accounting for a little extra time to finish everything up, that adds up to around 15 or 20 hours. At one time, especially the 90s, not being a 50 to 80 hour JRPG was a cardinal sin, so it was dinged by a lot of people for that. But now that a lot of those folks have grown up and have to budget their time, he'll relish a more compact experience. Live Alive is best experienced in spurts anyway. I've had a lot of fun playing it on the Nintendo Switch in portable mode for a bit, popping out of stories then popping back in somewhere else. A few of them, Japan in particular, I preferred on my TV. As an experiment, even almost 3 decades later, Live Alive mostly succeeds. Because it's unconventional at heart, it's going to be a bit polarizing, especially at $50, just as it was back when it released. Still, the juice is worth the squeeze if you're a particular type of person who likes oddities and stories that go for broke. Thank you for watching today's review. If you liked it, please remember to like and subscribe. To see the written version of this review, as well as other game reviews and game news, head on over to Destructoid.com.